What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? Maggie stared blankly at the television screen, the hum of the morning news washing over her like white noise she barely noticed anymore. The sun streamed weakly through the kitchen window, casting long, thin shadows on the faded linoleum floor. She had lived in this same small town all her life, the same house for more than 40 years, and lately, it all felt like it was moving too fast and leaving her behind. The headlines flashed: Tesla unveils game-changing battery tech, Elon Musk's vision for America's clean energy future, revolutionizing power, one cell at a time. Maggie barely understood the technology, but the name Elon Musk triggered something deep inside her, a spark she hadn't felt in a long time. She thought about the times she'd felt invisible lately, when her own children spoke over her or brushed off her questions about the future like she was from another era. At 67, Maggie wasn't fragile, but she felt fragile. Her knees ached from arthritis, and the mirror reflected a face that had aged more than she was ready to admit. The world celebrated youth and speed and innovation, Maggie was just quiet. Yet in that quiet kitchen, with a cup of lukewarm coffee growing cold in her hand, a question began to stir. What if she was wrong about what aging meant? What if it wasn't about slowing down or fading away, but something else entirely? The TV anchor's voice continued, this time quoting Elon Musk himself, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Those words echoed in Maggie's mind. Important enough for what? For change. For hope. For a new beginning. The question caught in her throat as a sudden urge rose, a whisper in the noise that maybe it wasn't too late to find purpose again. She looked around her kitchen, the familiar clutter of everyday life. The bills piled on the counter, the worn-out calendar hanging crooked on the wall, the old bicycle resting unused in the corner. The bicycle, once a symbol of freedom and adventure, now seemed a relic of a past life, like Maggie herself. Yet now, looking at it through a different lens, it felt less like a reminder of what was lost and more like a challenge waiting to be met. Could she really change? Could she really join the world of innovation and power, not just as a bystander but as someone who mattered? The question burned bright and urgent, pulling her forward in a way she hadn't experienced in years. She reached for her phone and hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Then she tapped open a popular video platform and typed in Elon Musk Tesla battery breakthrough. The videos poured in, each filled with hopeful energy and futuristic promises. Clean energy that could transform communities, technologies that could reduce dependence on fossil fuels, a future powered by brains and courage. Maggie didn't understand all the technical terms, but she felt the passion behind the words, the relentless refusal to accept limits, and the courage to dream bigger than the present reality. For the first time in a long time, Maggie's mind raced, not with worry or regret but with possibility. Could she be part of that future? As the video ended, she paused and typed a comment, watching from small-town Ohio. "This gives me hope." Then she smiled, a small but genuine curve of her lips. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Maggie thought about that question deeply. For her, it was the memory of her late husband, Tom, who had always believed in second chances and the power of persistence. It was the sound of children's laughter echoing through her old classroom, reminding her of the impact one life could have on many. It was the quiet strength she found in her own resilience, surviving loss and loneliness with a heart still open to love and growth. The day went on, but Maggie's restlessness remained. She decided to take a walk, to get outside, to feel the sun on her skin and the breeze in her hair. The neighborhood felt familiar yet different somehow. There was a new solar farm down the road, panels glinting in the afternoon light, a small sign announcing a community clean energy project. Maggie stopped, touched the cool metal of a nearby bike rack, and thought about the connection between those panels and the Tesla batteries she'd just learned about. Suddenly, the world didn't feel so distant, so intimidating. It felt full of promise. That night, as Maggie lay in bed, she thought about the path ahead. The doubts crept in again. Was she too old? Would anyone listen? Was this just wishful thinking? But then she heard Elon Musk's voice again in her head, fearless and uncompromising. Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace it if the alternative is disaster. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, and made a silent promise to herself. Tomorrow, she would take one small step, one that could lead to many more. Because maybe, just maybe, she was never too old to change. And maybe, just maybe, the future was waiting for her too. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Maggie had never been one for big changes. Life had unfolded with quiet routines, the kind that settled around you like an old quilt, familiar, comforting, but sometimes heavy. She remembered the early mornings of her teaching career, the thrill of standing in front of a classroom full of eager faces, the smell of chalk and old books mingling with the sound of children's laughter. Those days seemed like a lifetime ago. Now, the house felt too big, the rooms too silent without Tom's laughter echoing off the walls. She missed him more than words could say. Her children, Michael and Sarah, had grown distant over the years, caught up in their own lives across the country. Calls were rare, visits even rarer. Maggie often felt like a ghost in her own family, a relic of a past they had no time to visit. She thought about the regrets that followed her like shadows. The dreams she had shelved, the plan to travel the country in an RV, to write a book about her life, to learn new skills that might have kept her closer to her children. Instead, she had settled into the slow, predictable pattern of days measured in pill bottles and doctor's appointments. A particularly vivid memory haunted her, the last summer she and Tom had spent together on their small farm outside town. The sun was setting, casting golden light over rows of wildflowers and tall grass. Tom had taken her hand and whispered, "We've done good, Maggie. But there's still so much ahead." She hadn't believed him then. She had thought the years after retirement would be quiet, gentle, a slow fade into the background. But now, the ache of that lost future pressed on her chest like a weight. Maggie looked over at the old bicycle leaning against the garage wall, its paint chipped and faded, the tires flat from disuse. It had been her favorite way to escape when the world felt overwhelming, a symbol of freedom and possibility. Now, it was a reminder of how much time had slipped away. She wasn't just lonely, she was afraid. Afraid that her best days were behind her, that the world had moved on without her. And yet, somewhere deep inside, the faintest flicker of hope remained. The kind that whispered, "Not yet. There's still time." In the evenings, she sometimes scrolled through social media feeds she barely understood, catching glimpses of a world that seemed like science fiction, electric cars speeding down highways, rockets blasting off to Mars, inventions that promised to change everything. And always, somewhere in those stories, was Elon Musk. A man who seemed to defy limits, age, failure, fear, pushing forward with relentless determination. Maggie found herself drawn to his story, the way he embraced risk and refused to settle for good enough. It was a mindset so different from her own cautious, measured life. She wondered if she could borrow even a fraction of that courage. One rainy afternoon, Maggie sat in her favorite armchair by the window, sipping chamomile tea, lost in a photo album of her younger years. Pictures of family gatherings, birthdays, school plays, and summer vacations stared back at her. She smiled at the innocence frozen in time, the faces of friends long gone, the sparkle of youth in her own eyes. Yet beneath the smiles was a quiet sorrow, a feeling that those days had slipped through her fingers like sand. The loss of Tom was still raw, a wound that never fully healed. The silence in the house was a constant reminder of what was missing. She thought about the conversations that never happened, the words left unspoken, the moments that couldn't be reclaimed. She felt stuck between the past and a future that seemed uncertain and unreachable. When Michael called that evening, the distance in his voice was unmistakable. He talked about work, his own family, the busy pace of life. Maggie hesitated, wanting to share her feelings but unsure if he would listen. "Mom, you should slow down," he said gently. "You don't have to do everything yourself. You're not a kid anymore." The words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they felt like a closing door. "Maybe you're right," Maggie replied softly. "Maybe I am too old to change." After the call, Maggie sat alone in the dim light, wrestling with the question that had begun to define her days: is it too late? The world was racing forward, driven by innovation and youth, and she was on the sidelines, watching but not participating. She longed to be relevant again, to feel that her life still mattered. In the quiet of the night, she reached for her phone and opened a podcast she had saved weeks ago, an interview with Elon Musk. His voice filled the room, bold and uncompromising. "If something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. Age, failure, fear, they're just obstacles we put in front of ourselves. The only thing that limits us is how much we're willing to risk." Maggie listened intently, the words sinking into her like a bomb. They challenged everything she had believed about growing older, that it was a time to retreat, to accept less, to give up. What if she could rewrite that story? What if, like Musk, she could find a new purpose, a new way to contribute, to lead? The next morning, Maggie awoke with a strange energy coursing through her veins. The ache in her knees was still there, but her heart felt lighter. She dressed quickly and stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. The neighborhood was waking up around her, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the smell of damp earth. She decided to walk to the local library, a place she hadn't visited in years. Inside, she found a quiet corner and pulled out a book about renewable energy technologies. The pages were filled with terms she didn't fully understand: lithium-ion batteries, energy density, grid storage, but the bigger picture was clear: the future of power was changing, and clean energy was at its heart. Maggie thought about the Tesla battery tech she had heard about on the news. She imagined communities powered by the sun and wind, free from the chains of pollution and fossil fuels. It was a vision she could believe in. Later that week, Maggie attended a meeting at the community center advertised as a forum on sustainable energy. The room was filled mostly with younger people, engineers, activists, curious residents, but Maggie felt welcome. She introduced herself quietly and listened as speakers described the potential of new battery technologies to transform everyday life. When it was her turn to speak, her voice trembled slightly, but she shared her hope to learn and contribute. To her surprise, several people approached her afterward with encouragement. For the first time in a long time, Maggie felt part of something bigger, a movement toward change that wasn't reserved for the young or tech-savvy. It was for anyone willing to believe and act. One afternoon, as Maggie walked past her old bicycle in the garage, she felt a sudden urge. She wheeled it outside and inspected the rusted chain and flat tires. The bike was far from perfect, but she saw potential. She decided to fix it, starting with small repairs, visiting the local hardware store and asking questions. The process was slow and sometimes frustrating, but it gave her a sense of purpose and accomplishment. Each turn of the wrench was a step away from the fear that had held her captive. Her neighbors began to notice, and some even offered help. One young man, Jake, who worked at the bike shop, taught her how to patch a tire and oil the gears. The days grew shorter, but Maggie's determination grew stronger. She began to take short rides around the neighborhood, feeling the wind on her face and the rhythm of the pedals beneath her feet. The bicycle became a symbol of her small but bold choice to move forward. Meanwhile, Maggie's children noticed the change. Sarah called more often, curious about her mother's new activities. Michael sent links to articles on clean energy, inviting conversation. Old friendships rekindled as Maggie shared her journey and listened to others. It wasn't easy, old wounds surfaced, doubts remained, but the lightness of hope now balanced the weight of regret. One evening, Maggie sat by the window again, looking out at the stars. She thought about the moments that had shaped her, the love and loss, the dreams and disappointments, and how they had led her here, to this new beginning. Elon Musk's words echoed once more, "Don't be afraid to think big and dream big, even if you're starting late." Maggie smiled to herself, a quiet strength settling in her chest. Maybe she wasn't just a forgotten woman watching from the sidelines. Maybe she was a spark waiting to ignite, a story still unfolding. And maybe, just maybe, the best was yet to come. The war inside Maggie's heart was no less fierce than any battlefield. She wrestled daily with questions that gnawed at her spirit. Is it too late for me? Does anyone even care? What's the point of trying when the world moves on without you? Her body ached more now, and the mirror's reflection seemed harsher each day. She knew the truth: her children, busy with their own lives, often dismissed her efforts to keep up with the world. "Mom, just slow down," Michael had said again last week, his voice heavy with concern but also impatience. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone." The doctor's visits echoed the same refrain: "Take it easy. Rest more." The society around her whispered louder, suggesting that her best years were behind her, that aging meant stepping aside and letting others take the lead. But Maggie felt a fierce resistance growing beneath that weariness, a spark kindled by something she had glimpsed in Elon Musk's relentless drive. She caught a moment of quiet one evening, sitting alone in her dim living room, the glow of the television casting flickering shadows on the walls. A news segment played, a clip of Musk speaking passionately about pushing boundaries, embracing failure as a lesson, and the audacity of dreaming bigger than the present reality. His voice was steady, confident, unyielding. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. Maggie held those words close, repeating them in her mind like a mantra. But with that hope came new battles. Doubts crept in relentlessly. Was she just fooling herself? Could a woman in her late 60s really change course? Could she learn new technologies, connect with a younger generation, make a difference in a world that prized speed and novelty? The digital world intimidated her. Social media felt like an alien language. She sometimes stared at her phone, unsure how to keep up with the constant flood of information and innovation. It was easier to retreat into silence, to fold herself into the comfort of old routines. And yet, the old Maggie, the woman who had dedicated her life to teaching, inspiring young minds, refused to let go. She wanted to believe that her story wasn't over. The conflict wasn't only internal. Conversations with her children grew more strained. Sarah gently warned, "Mom, you're trying too hard. You're not the same person you were 20 years ago." That hurt more than Maggie expected. It wasn't that she wanted to prove them wrong, she wanted to prove herself right, that she still had worth, still had something to give. Community events sometimes left her feeling out of place. Younger volunteers talked in acronyms and tech jargon she didn't understand. She'd often leave feeling exhausted and discouraged. The world seemed to have little patience for someone who moved more slowly, who didn't have the latest gadgets or fastest internet connection. One afternoon, after a particularly discouraging meeting, Maggie found herself alone on a bench outside the community center. The sky was gray and overcast, mirroring the heaviness inside her. She pulled out her phone and opened a video she'd saved weeks ago, an interview with Elon Musk discussing failure. He spoke openly about mistakes, setbacks, and the importance of resilience. "If you're trying something truly revolutionary, you're going to fail many times," Musk said. "But every failure is a lesson. Every lesson is progress." Maggie felt tears sting her eyes. It wasn't that her failures were monumental, but they felt personal: missed opportunities, lost connections, the slow erosion of hope. She realized she had been treating herself too harshly. Could she see her own struggles as part of a larger journey? Inspired, Maggie made a small decision that day. She would try again. Not perfectly, not quickly, but with heart. She started by reaching out to an online group focused on renewable energy for seniors. The community was welcoming, patient, and full of people who understood the challenge of learning something new later in life. She began asking questions, reading articles, watching videos, and slowly, the language of battery technology and clean energy began to make sense. One quote from Musk resonated deeply: "I think it is possible for ordinary people to choose to be extraordinary." Maggie didn't feel extraordinary. She felt ordinary, sometimes invisible. But she was beginning to understand that extraordinary wasn't about being young or flawless, it was about courage, persistence, and the refusal to give up. Her physical limitations still challenged her. Days when her joints ached more than usual tested her resolve. But instead of seeing those days as failure, she learned to see them as part of the rhythm. A cycle of effort and rest, progress and pause. Slowly, she built a small routine: morning walks to clear her head, afternoons studying battery tech basics, evenings calling friends who shared her interest. She noticed that even small steps brought a sense of accomplishment. She also faced moments of skepticism and dismissal from others in her town. Some neighbors whispered about the old lady chasing impossible dreams. Maggie heard the doubts but chose not to listen. Instead, she focused on what Musk called the vision, the big picture of a cleaner, better future powered by innovation and bold thinking. The more she learned about Tesla's new battery technology, the way it could store energy more efficiently and make solar power more accessible, the more she felt connected to something bigger than herself. It wasn't just about technology, it was about hope and action. One evening, Maggie's resolve was tested in a way she hadn't anticipated. Her son Michael stopped by unexpectedly. He found her surrounded by books and notes, her bicycle leaning against the wall, tools scattered on the kitchen table. He looked tired and uncertain. "Mom, I don't get it," he said, shaking his head. "Why are you doing this now? You've already lived a full life. Isn't it time to slow down and enjoy things?" Maggie met his gaze, steady and honest. "Because I'm not done," she said quietly. "Because there's still more I want to do. More I want to learn. More I want to give. Age doesn't have to mean the end, Michael. It can be a beginning." The room was silent for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, the edge of understanding softening his expression. "I guess I never thought about it that way." That night, Maggie felt a fragile hope blossoming between them, a bridge built on openness and respect. She realized that her journey wasn't just about technology or clean energy, it was about breaking down barriers, in her mind, in her family, in society's assumptions about aging. The inner war continued, but it was no longer a battle she faced alone. She found allies in unexpected places, in online communities, in her neighbors, in the stories she read, and in the bold example of Elon Musk's unyielding vision. She started keeping a journal, writing down her thoughts, fears, and small victories. The act of putting pen to paper helped her organize the chaos inside and focus on what mattered. One entry read, "I am not too old to change. I am not invisible. I am here, and I will be part of the future." As autumn deepened, Maggie's transformation gained momentum. She volunteered to help organize a local clean energy fair, offering to share what she had learned about Tesla's batteries. The event was modest but meaningful, bringing together people of all ages curious about the possibilities of renewable power. Maggie stood at a booth with printed diagrams and simple explanations, answering questions and listening to stories. She saw skepticism, but she also saw curiosity and hope. A young mother thanked her for making the topic understandable. A retired engineer shared his excitement about the technology. Maggie felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. The inner war was far from over, there were days when doubt stormed back with full force. But each time, she remembered Musk's words about perseverance and vision. She learned to hold those words like a shield against fear and despair. In the quiet moments before sleep, she sometimes reflected on her journey so far. She had moved from feeling like a forgotten relic to someone who mattered. She had found purpose not by trying to be someone she wasn't, but by embracing who she was and what she could still become. The inner war remained a part of her story, but it was no longer the whole story. Maggie had discovered that hope and struggle could coexist, that transformation was a process, not a destination. And she had found in Elon Musk's example a mirror reflecting what was possible when courage meets vision, no matter your age, no matter your past, no matter the obstacles. As the first snowflakes fell softly outside her window, Maggie felt ready to face the next chapter of her life with open eyes and an open heart. She was no longer waiting for permission to matter. She was claiming her place in the future. The moment Maggie decided to act, the world seemed to shift beneath her feet. It wasn't a grand gesture or an earth-shattering event, but a small, deliberate step, a choice to change something tangible in her life, inspired by Elon Musk's fearless example. She woke one morning with a quiet determination that felt unfamiliar yet exhilarating. The old bicycle, once a forgotten relic gathering dust in the garage, suddenly represented more than nostalgia. It was a symbol of movement, freedom, and possibility. Maggie rolled it outside, the rusty chain protesting with a gritty sound. She fetched a set of tools from the cluttered shelf and began methodically cleaning, oiling, and tightening bolts. Each task required patience, a careful attention that reminded her of her teaching days, guiding young minds with gentle persistence. The work was slow and sometimes frustrating, but Maggie welcomed the physical challenge. It felt good to use her hands, to focus on something real and concrete. She was reminded of Musk's words, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." The odds, in Maggie's case, were her age, creaky joints, and the skepticism that hovered around her like a cloud. Yet she refused to let those odds define her. Repairing the bicycle became a daily ritual. She researched tutorials online, asked questions in forums, and even called a local bike shop for advice. To her surprise, the younger employees treated her with kindness and respect, sharing tips and encouraging her efforts. The bike shop's Jake became an unexpected ally, patiently teaching Maggie how to fix a flat tire, adjust brakes, and maintain the chain. Their conversations drifted beyond bikes to stories about dreams deferred and rediscovered. Maggie found herself laughing more, feeling a lightness that had been absent for too long. When the bicycle was finally roadworthy, Maggie took tentative rides around her quiet neighborhood. The wind on her face, the rhythm of the pedals, the steady hum of tires on pavement stirred something deep inside her, a sense of agency and joy. Neighbors noticed the transformation. Some smiled with encouragement, others seemed puzzled by her sudden burst of activity. But Maggie no longer sought approval, she sought only to reclaim her sense of purpose. Around the same time, Maggie decided to create a blog, a small space on the internet where she could share her journey learning about Tesla's new battery technology and clean energy's promise. She had never considered herself tech-savvy, but the online community she had joined offered support and tutorials. With each post, she found her voice growing stronger, her confidence building. She wrote not just about technology, but about hope, resilience, and the courage to change. Readers began to respond, sharing their own stories of late-in-life transformations and dreams rekindled. Maggie's blog became a digital campfire where people from all walks of life gathered to inspire and uplift one another. Her children noticed too. Sarah sent an email one evening, praising Maggie's writing and asking to be featured in her next post. Michael called more frequently, curious about the latest developments she had discovered. The distance that once felt vast began to shrink as conversations deepened and understanding grew. Yet, the path was not without obstacles. Maggie faced days when old fears crept back, fears of failure, rejection, and being too slow to keep up. On one such day, she received a terse message from a reader dismissing her efforts as naive. The word stung, and for a moment, doubt clouded her resolve. But she remembered Musk's response to criticism, "If you're not failing, you're not innovating." With renewed determination, Maggie replied with kindness, thanking the reader for their perspective and reaffirming her commitment to learning and growing. This small act of courage marked a turning point. She realized that the journey was as much about inner strength as outer progress. Inspired by Tesla's breakthroughs in battery technology, specifically the promise of longer-lasting, more affordable energy storage, Maggie began volunteering with a local nonprofit focused on bringing clean energy solutions to underserved communities. The work was hands-on and challenging, but deeply rewarding. She helped organize workshops, delivered presentations, and even assisted with small installations of solar panels and home batteries. Each interaction reinforced her belief that meaningful change was possible at any age. Maggie's story began to ripple beyond her neighborhood. A local newspaper featured her blog and volunteer work, highlighting her as an example of resilience and reinvention. The article attracted attention from a regional clean energy conference, where Maggie was invited to speak. Standing before a crowd of engineers, activists, and entrepreneurs, Maggie felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She shared her journey honestly, the fears, the doubts, the small victories, and emphasized the power of vision and action, no matter your age. The audience responded with warm applause, many moved by her authenticity and courage. After the talk, several people approached Maggie with offers of collaboration and support. She was no longer invisible, she was a voice worth hearing. One moment from that day stayed with her, a young woman in the audience who told Maggie she had been inspired to pursue a career in clean energy because of her story. The realization that her journey could ignite change in others was profoundly moving. Meanwhile, Maggie's personal life saw unexpected healing. She reached out to Tom's daughter from a previous marriage, whom she had never met but had heard about over the years. Their initial conversations were tentative but grew into a warm, supportive friendship. Maggie realized that it wasn't too late to build new connections, to expand the circle of family and belonging. Despite the progress, Maggie's transformation was not linear. Some nights, the weight of loneliness pressed down hard. The silence of the house felt suffocating. She missed Tom fiercely, and there were moments when she questioned if the effort was worth it. But the small victories, the repaired bicycle, the blog comments, the community events, were like stars in the dark, guiding her forward. She learned to celebrate these moments, no matter how small. Maggie also began exploring new hobbies that challenged her mind and body. She took a beginner's course in coding, fascinated by the idea of understanding the technology powering the world's most advanced batteries. The classes were sometimes frustrating, but they pushed her beyond comfort zones she hadn't dared to cross in years. With each lesson, she felt her confidence grow. She joined a local walking group that combined gentle exercise with discussions about innovation and sustainability. These walks brought new friendships and renewed energy. She found herself dreaming again, not just of personal adventures, but of contributing to a movement that could shape the future. Elon Musk's image, once distant and almost mythic, had become a symbol of radical possibility. Maggie didn't see him as a savior but as a catalyst, a spark igniting the fire of change within herself and others. She realized that the journey wasn't about becoming Elon Musk but about embracing the qualities he embodied: courage, vision, and relentless hope. As winter gave way to spring, Maggie reflected on how far she had come. The bicycle rides had expanded to longer routes, her blog had a steady following, and her involvement in the clean energy nonprofit deepened. She was no longer the woman who sat silently, watching life pass her by. She was active, engaged, and hopeful. One morning, she stood outside watching the sunrise, the sky painted in soft hues of orange and pink. The air was crisp, filled with the promise of new beginnings. She thought about the moment it all changed, the day she decided to fix the bicycle, to write the first blog post, to push against the quiet despair that had settled in her heart. It had been a small choice, but it sparked a transformation that touched every part of her life. Maggie knew the road ahead would have challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But she was ready. Ready to face whatever came next with an open heart and a fierce spirit. "I was never too old," she whispered to the morning light. "I was just waiting for permission to matter again." And in that moment, she gave herself that permission. The world was still full of possibilities, and she was determined to explore them all. The breakthrough came quietly, almost unexpectedly, like the first rays of sunlight filtering through a stormy sky. Maggie had been working steadily, building her small but meaningful presence in the clean energy community, balancing moments of doubt with bursts of determination. Then, One afternoon, as she sat in her modest living room, a notification popped up on her blog, a message from a young engineer named David, who worked for a company collaborating with Tesla on battery technology. He had stumbled upon her posts while researching community outreach and wanted to invite her to visit a Tesla facility in California, to see firsthand the innovations shaping America's clean energy future. The invitation felt surreal. Maggie stared at the email, heart pounding, mind racing with possibilities and fears. Could she really make this trip? Was it too bold, too late? But beneath the hesitation, a fierce flame of excitement flared. This was the moment she had been working toward, the chance to witness the future, to connect her small efforts to a larger mission. She accepted immediately. The days leading up to the trip were a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. Maggie arranged for a caretaker to stay with her during her absence, packed her bags with a mix of practical clothes and notebooks filled with questions and ideas. On the plane, as the landscape stretched below her, she felt a mixture of nervousness and exhilaration. This wasn't just a vacation, it was a leap into a new chapter of her life. At the Tesla facility, Maggie was greeted warmly by David and his team. The sprawling campus buzzed with energy, a hive of innovation and purpose. She toured the manufacturing lines where battery cells were assembled with precision, watched engineers test new prototypes designed to store more energy, last longer, and reduce costs. The scale and complexity of the operation were awe-inspiring. Maggie felt a deep connection to the mission, the urgent push to power America's clean energy future and combat climate change. She asked questions, took notes, and shared stories from her community outreach efforts. The engineers listened with genuine interest, impressed by her passion and dedication despite her age. David introduced her to a group working on a new battery design that promised to revolutionize energy storage, a technology that could make solar power more reliable and affordable for millions. Maggie was invited to join brainstorming sessions, her fresh perspective welcomed as a reminder that innovation thrived on diverse voices and experiences. During her visit, Maggie also had the chance to meet Elon Musk himself. He was as intense and focused as the public image suggested, yet there was a surprising warmth in his conversations. Musk asked about Maggie's journey, how she had rediscovered purpose and taken action later in life. He praised her courage and resilience, emphasizing that change was possible for anyone willing to push boundaries and embrace uncertainty. Age is just a number, Musk said, eyes sharp and sincere. The only limits are the ones you accept. Maggie left the facility energized, her spirit soaring. She realized that this trip wasn't just about seeing technology. It was about becoming part of a movement, a community of thinkers and doers dedicated to shaping a better future. Back home, Maggie's story took on new life. She shared her experiences on her blog, posting photos and detailed reflections. Her words resonated with readers across the country, seniors who felt invisible, dreamers who feared it was too late, anyone grappling with doubt and change. The posts went viral, attracting attention from media outlets and advocacy groups. Maggie found herself invited to speak on podcasts, write guest articles, and participate in panels about aging, technology, and environmental activism. The woman who had once felt forgotten was now a beacon of inspiration. Yet with visibility came vulnerability. Maggie encountered critics who questioned her motives or minimized her contributions. Some accused her of seeking attention, others doubted the sincerity of her transformation. But Maggie stood firm, grounded in the authenticity of her journey. She learned to filter noise from truth, focusing on the impact she could make rather than the judgments she faced. The emotional climax came during a national clean energy summit where Maggie was invited to deliver a keynote speech. Standing before a packed auditorium, she looked out at a sea of faces, young and old, hopeful and determined. Her voice trembled slightly as she began, but grew stronger with each word. She shared her story honestly, the struggles with aging, the doubts, the small steps that led to bigger changes. She spoke of Elon Musk's influence as a catalyst, a symbol of fearless vision and relentless hope. And she declared boldly, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again. Maggie stood at the edge of the stage, her fingers trembling slightly as she clutched the microphone. The Clean Energy Conference buzzed with excitement, rows of folding chairs filled with students, engineers, small-town officials, and a handful of press. Just months earlier, the very idea of being on a stage would have felt absurd. Now, she had something to say. She looked out over the crowd, took a steadying breath, and began. My name is Maggie Sanders. I'm 67 years old. I never thought I'd be standing here talking to you about battery technology or the future of power. But something changed. I changed. Her voice was clear, calm, lined with wisdom. She told them about the day she saw Elon Musk on TV, speaking about battery breakthroughs and the power of thinking differently. She explained how that one quote, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor," lodged itself in her mind like a seed, and slowly began to grow. She described the loneliness that had defined her recent years, the doubt, the invisible grief of a life that had begun to feel like a slow fade. But I wasn't done. I just needed to believe that change was still possible. She told them about the bicycle, the blog, the bruised pride and the small wins. The audience listened, some nodding, others wiping tears they didn't expect. Maggie wrapped up by reminding them that progress wasn't just about youth or speed or perfect code. It was also about persistence, and refusing to disappear. She left the stage to warm applause. That moment felt like a breakthrough, not just emotionally, but symbolically. For so long, Maggie had looked at the world of clean energy as something far removed, as if it belonged to brilliant minds in Silicon Valley or engineers in labs. Now, she saw herself as part of it. Not because she could design a battery cell or write machine learning algorithms, but because she had the courage to care, and to act. In the following weeks, more opportunities arrived. The nonprofit she volunteered with asked if she'd be willing to lead outreach for seniors, helping bridge the gap between older communities and new technology. She accepted without hesitation. The role allowed her to connect with others like her. People who had quietly assumed they were too old to matter in conversations about the future. Maggie began organizing workshops, starting with a borrowed church basement and folding chairs. The first event drew only 7 people. The second brought 12. By the fourth, the room was full. She used plain language, practical examples, and always included a story from her own journey. She'd talk about how batteries weren't just powering Teslas, they were powering homes, hospitals, entire communities. She explained how storage technology was crucial for solar and wind energy, making renewables viable even when the sun wasn't shining or the wind wasn't blowing. And she reminded everyone that this technology wasn't just for the rich or the young. We've spent our lives paying into a world. Now it's time we help shape it. Maggie's impact was growing, but with growth came new challenges. During one community meeting, a county official questioned her credibility. "You're not an engineer or a scientist," he said, his tone more polite than kind. "Why should people listen to you about something this technical?" Maggie didn't flinch. "Because this isn't just about tech," she said, locking eyes with him. "It's about trust. About how we bring change to people who've been left out of the conversation. And sometimes, trust starts with someone who speaks their language." The room went quiet. Someone clapped. Then another. The official offered a stiff nod. That night, Maggie wrote a blog post titled "Innovation is for Everyone," and it quickly became her most shared article yet. More people began to reach out. A retired nurse from Florida. A former factory worker from Michigan. A grandmother in New Mexico who wanted to install solar panels but didn't know where to start. Maggie responded to every message with warmth and encouragement. She understood the power of being seen. Despite the growing momentum, Maggie never pretended the journey was easy. There were days when her energy flagged, when the glare of screens gave her headaches, when the aches in her joints made it difficult to climb stairs or lift tools. She found herself wrestling with guilt, guilt for taking naps when others seemed to be running full speed, guilt for forgetting a fact during a presentation, guilt for not doing more. But she learned to meet herself with grace. One afternoon, overwhelmed and close to tears, she pulled up another video of Elon Musk speaking about the early days of Tesla. He talked about sleeping on the factory floor, facing bankruptcy, being ridiculed. He talked about pushing through fear, embracing imperfection, and moving forward anyway. "If you're coasting, you're going downhill," he said in the clip. Maggie wiped her eyes. She wasn't coasting. She was climbing. Slowly, imperfectly, but climbing. That weekend, she returned to the workshop space early, broom in hand, sweeping the dusty floor before the others arrived. As she worked, she thought about legacy, not the kind built on money or inventions, but the kind built on people. Influence. Courage. Action. At the end of the day, she didn't want to be remembered just for what she tried, but for how many people she helped believe they could try too. Her relationship with her children continued to evolve. Michael began sharing articles with her about battery recycling and grid storage. Sarah sent postcards from her travels, adding little notes, "Saw a Tesla charging station and thought of you." It wasn't a full return to the closeness they once had, but it was a start, a bridge rebuilt slowly, with new understanding. One evening, Maggie received an email that took her breath away. It was from a producer at a major news outlet. They wanted to feature her in a segment about ordinary Americans leading extraordinary lives in clean energy. "You're helping reshape the image of what leadership looks like," the message read. Maggie sat in stunned silence, the screen glowing in the dark. She hadn't set out to be a leader. She'd only wanted to matter again. Now, her story might inspire millions. But with the offer came fear. Would she say the wrong thing on camera? Would people mock her online? Would the trolls come for her age, her appearance, her inexperience? That night, sleep didn't come easily. But as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she remembered something she'd written in her journal months earlier: "Fear is a sign you're moving towards something bigger than yourself." In the morning, she wrote back with one word: yes. The news crew arrived 2 weeks later. They interviewed her in the same garage where the bicycle had been reborn, surrounded by her growing collection of tools, notebooks, and solar panel brochures. She spoke honestly about her transformation, the doubts, the moments of wonder, and the stubborn hope that drove her forward. When the segment aired, the response was overwhelming. Her inbox overflowed. Strangers wrote from across the country, some from across the world, thanking her for proving it wasn't too late to change. One message simply said, "You lit a fire in me." Maggie cried quietly at her kitchen table that night, overwhelmed by the idea that a retired teacher from a quiet town could touch lives so far beyond her own. But she understood now, impact didn't come from perfection. It came from showing up, again and again, even when no one was watching. Especially then. Her story, like Musk's rockets or Tesla's batteries, wasn't about flawless execution. It was about breaking inertia. About momentum. About refusing to believe the lie that time had run out. As spring rolled into summer, Maggie began dreaming bigger. She proposed a pilot program to help equip rural homes with affordable battery storage systems, using local volunteers to assist with installations and education. The nonprofit loved the idea. So did donors. Maggie stood again, not on a stage this time, but in a neighbor's backyard, helping install their first Powerwall unit. The family beamed with pride. Maggie, sweat on her brow and dirt on her hands, felt more alive than she had in decades. In that moment, she didn't feel old. She didn't feel forgotten. She felt powerful. She looked out at the horizon, the sky streaked with amber light, and smiled. This wasn't just about clean energy anymore. It was about human energy. The kind that never truly runs out, if you're brave enough to reignite it. Maggie awoke one morning to a world that felt both familiar and entirely new, the memory of what she had become whispering through her bones. She no longer saw herself as a fading widow or an irrelevant bystander. Instead, she felt like a conductor, guiding energy in its many forms, from Tesla's cutting-edge batteries to the spark of courage rekindled in her heart. In recent months, she had immersed herself in the realm of clean energy, learning about how Tesla Energy, born from Musk's bold vision, combines solar generation and battery storage to empower homes, communities, and even entire utilities. She understood, too, how rapidly Tesla's energy storage output had expanded, deploying millions of kilowatt-hours of batteries in 2023, up sharply from prior years, and how that shift signaled a transformation in how America powers itself. These weren't just headlines to Maggie, they were the lifeblood of a movement she now embodied. That day, she walked into the nonprofit's small office, a familiar nervous flutter in her chest as she set her tote bag down. She had been entrusted with leading a pilot program for installing residential battery storage systems. This wasn't theoretical. It involved coordination with vendors, educating homeowners, and gathering community volunteers. It was tangible change, and perhaps her most ambitious step yet. She began by hosting a planning session in her living room, where local volunteers, retirees, young parents, high school students, gathered around a fold-out table. Spread before them were printouts of diagrams for home battery systems, including Tesla Powerwalls and Megapacks, and simplified breakdowns of how solar plus storage could maintain backup power during storms or outages. Maggie shared her vision plainly. "These systems don't belong only in fancy homes," she said, voice steady. "They're for people like us, people who've earned the right to live with dignity and security. This isn't about tech, it's about caring for each other." The group buzzed with energy. Many had never thought about energy infrastructure before. Now, they were invested in planning routes, identifying local installers, and drafting newsletters. Maggie felt a thrill at the thought of this small team powered by hers and Elon Musk's spirit of possibility fused together. The following weekend, Maggie organized her first field visit, walking through a quiet lane where a local neighbor, Tom Jenkins, had agreed to let them install a Powerwall behind his home. Tom was in his late 70s, retired and wary of public attention. But he believed in community resilience and trusted Maggie. As they worked, she sat with him on a lawn chair, the battery humming gently nearby. They watched as a technician completed the wiring, then talked about wind, storms, and the fragility of aging bodies in harsh winters. Maggie realized this wasn't just about electrons and systems. It was about safety, independence, and peace of mind. Later, standing beside the completed installation, Tom placed a hand over hers and said, "You did this. You helped me feel safe again." She looked at the humming box, a small miracle in aluminum and circuitry, and smiled through tears. She heard Musk's voice in her memory, "If something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." At that moment, that single whispered sentence felt like proof, not only for him, but for herself. Soon, word of the pilot spread. Local newspapers ran stories about the retiree leading a clean energy revolution in her town, and the nonprofit's inbox filled with messages from nearby counties asking for help. Maggie worked with local volunteers to host informational sessions, pairing human stories with clear, hopeful explanations of how clean energy worked and why it mattered. She emphasized that Tesla Energy, with its integrated solar and storage solutions, wasn't just about innovation but about democratizing power. Letting communities hold energy in their hands, literally and figuratively. As spring greened into summer, Maggie and her team launched their first mini-grid project, a network of 5 homes connected as a virtual power plant, sharing stored solar energy during peak demand, as Musk had envisioned, empowering communities to create resilient ecosystems together. The success of the first mini-grid brought local recognition, invitations to speak at regional clean energy forums, and an emerging sense across the town that age and status didn't limit impact, they amplified compassion and clarity. Yet none of it came without struggle. Maggie wrestled with doubt when her joints flared painfully or when unfamiliar regulatory hurdles slowed progress. There were budget setbacks, skeptical comments from officials, and the sheer stress of coordinating volunteer schedules and vendor contracts. But on those days, she returned to that dark living room where Musk talked about failure being a lesson. She reminded herself that slow, patient work often heals more than grand gestures. At night, she wrote in her journal, "My legs may tremble, but my heart is strong." She remembered why she began, not for recognition, but to matter again. Now, she wanted every neighbor, every blurred vision senior, to know, it's never too late to matter. One evening, her children came by unannounced. They found her in her study, reviewing wiring diagrams and email threads. Michael looked at her with both pride and awe. Sarah greeted her in a smile and said, "I saw the video of the mini-grid going live." Maggie nodded, emotion pooling. "I'm building something." Michael hesitated. Then asked softly, "Will you help us install one at Dad's place back east?" In that request, she felt the circle of family healing, years lost, then found through action, story, and vulnerability. As summer deepened, Maggie's pilot attracted the attention of a statewide clean energy coalition. They invited her to share her story and lessons at their annual summit. She stood before hundreds of attendees, young and old, activists and policymakers, her voice as steady as the mornings she spent biking and organizing. She spoke of aging, hope, and the power of choice. She spoke of Elon Musk's example, not as idol, but as a mirror reflecting her own capacity to act and persist. She said, "Innovating isn't just for the young. It's for the brave." The applause carried her somewhere beyond exhaustion, into a place of quiet triumph. Words buzzed in her inbox the next day, from a senior center in Arizona asking for curriculum, a city mayor in Michigan requesting pilot assistance, and a stranger writing, "You lit something in me that I thought was lost." Maggie sat at her desk, tears tracing lines on her cheeks. She realized then how far she'd traveled. From quiet grief to purpose, from feeling irrelevant to knowing that her story had fuel, and that in sharing it, she had ignited countless others. That night, she stepped outside to watch the sunset paint the horizon lavender and gold. She thought of the power humming in those batteries, of solar panels quietly capturing photons, of the human energy flowing in bravery, curiosity, and generosity. Age had not dimmed her. If anything, it had deepened her vision. Whispering to the gathering dusk, she repeated softly, "I was never too old. I was just waiting to believe I could still matter." And as the sky went dark, stars emerged, distant, ancient lights reminding her that the future is always waiting for the brave, and that sometimes, the bravest step is simply choosing to begin again. Maggie's curiosity, once a flicker, now burned bright as she plunged deeper into the mechanics and promise of Tesla's revolutionary battery innovations. She had long admired Elon Musk's audacity, but now she sought to understand the transformation he was driving, 1 megawatt-hour at a time. It began with energy storage numbers that made her sit up straight. Tesla deployed a staggering 31.4 GWh of battery storage in 2024, more than double the 14.7 GWh installed in 2023, a surge she found both exhilarating and profoundly hopeful. She thought of how those numbers represented more than data, they were evidence of momentum, proof that change was accelerating and that ordinary towns like hers could ride its wake. She studied charts showing Tesla Energy's revenue hitting $10.1 billion in 2024, up 67% from the previous year, with gross profit jumping to $2.6 billion. Reading about the shift from solar energy generation, now slower, to the surging energy storage business, she felt like she was learning the language of the future. This wasn't abstract, it was a real, measurable wave, and she could help her community catch it. Maggie dove into the design of the Megapack itself. Each container, roughly the size of a shipping container, stored up to about 3.9 megawatt-hours of energy and was built for grid-scale deployment. She imagined what that meant: hospitals running through outages, streets lighting up during storms, energy independence growing from steel and chemistry. Tesla had pushed the limits with its Lathrop megafactory, built to reach 40 GWh capacity per year, and a Shanghai factory was coming online soon with the same goal. The company even celebrated its 1000th megapack produced in Shanghai, destined for Europe, just a few months after production began. Maggie felt the surge of global coordination behind these numbers. It felt like humanity was aligning toward resilience. The idea that energy storage could double in size and profitability in a single year gave Maggie chills. She pictured the community workshops she led. Just textbook explanations of energy technology before, but now she understood the urgency behind them. Tesla deployments weren't only about gadgets, they were about possibility, progress, and rewriting what aging communities could contribute. Elon Musk often emphasized that battery demand would explode globally and that the US grid, needing 1 terawatt of sustained output, could leverage batteries to store off-peak energy and relieve demand peaks. Maggie saw how this reframed energy not as edges and wires but as timing and hope. It meant community microgrids, sheltered families, and new control over one's daily life, regardless of age. This awareness transformed her teaching. In the past, she had simplified battery tech into clunky diagrams and analogies about jars of energy. Now she taught with data, deployments rising from 14.7 to 31.4 GWh in a year, revenue multiplying, factories springing up in Texas and Shanghai, gigafactories humming with innovation. It made clean energy feel immediate and urgent, and accessible. She described how the Lathrop facility was doubling output, how Shanghai's factory was ramping, and how competition like Tesla's massive contract with South Korea's LG for LFP, lithium iron phosphate, batteries helped diversify supply, lowering cost and reducing reliance on expensive, tariff-vulnerable sources. The group in her living room nodded and leaned closer. She wasn't just delivering lessons anymore, she was catalyzing understanding. An older neighbor who had shut down with Alzheimer's lit up at talk of reliable, affordable backup power. A young schoolteacher saw how she could integrate energy storage science into lessons. Their energy fed Maggie's own, and she felt less alone standing here. On the day of her next community energy fair, Maggie packed charts and stories, graphic comparison of deployments year over year, revenue graphs, megapack visuals, and snapshots of Tesla's US and global factory plans. She spoke without hesitation, linking Elon's bold quotes to hard data, and ending with, "This technology isn't distant or elite. It's real, growing fast, and it's ours, if we choose to use it." Afterward, a volunteer asked Maggie if the project could expand into neighborhood emergency planning, battery ranges for shelters, solar sheds for seniors. She said yes, because she now understood how fast and tangible the energy revolution was becoming. That night, she reflected under her porch light. She had gone from vague admiration of Musk's courage to comprehending the scale, and how her story fit into that bigger wave. She had gone from fixing a bike to helping power houses with megapacks, from becoming visible again to now imaginable as part of a national story of resilience and optimization. Tomorrow, she would plan a visit to the site under construction in Texas, Brookshire, not far from Houston, where a new megapack megafactory would open in 2026, offering 1,500 jobs and doubling grid-scale battery production in the US. Maybe she could visit, maybe share her story with workers and executives, proof that clean energy wasn't just an idea, but a force pulling communities forward. Because in the rising deployment charts and expanding factories was the promise she chased not just for herself, but for everyone who thought they were too old to matter. The numbers were not just numbers, they were movement, and in movement lay hope. Maggie found herself captivated by the power of vision, not as a distant star to chase, but as an engine she could feed with knowledge and purpose. Her journey had started with a spark, Elon Musk's words, a repaired bicycle, a sense that she could still matter. Now, fueled by the growing reality of Tesla's accelerating battery breakthroughs, her heart and mind expanded in ways she hadn't expected. It began with data that leapt off her screen and into her bones. Tesla deployed a staggering 31.4 GWh of energy storage in 2024, more than double the 14.7 GWh deployed in 2023, a 114% year-over-year surge that shattered records and embodied real momentum. That number became her lodestar, proof that the energy era was ramping up, that this wasn't hype, it was happening, and fast. She read that Tesla's energy generation and storage division brought in $10.1 billion in revenue in 2024, up 67% from the previous year, with gross profit soaring to $2.6 billion. The words, "growing like wildfire," spoken by Musk about this business, seemed to echo through Maggie's soul. She understood now that clean energy wasn't a wistful dream. It was a thriving, revenue-generating force altering economies and powering futures. More than the numbers, it was the mechanics that thrilled her. Each Tesla Megapack could store around 3.9 megawatt-hours of energy. Soon, vast factories in California and Shanghai were aimed at producing enough to hit 40 GWh annually. Maggie pictured those shipping container-sized batteries humming in production lines, waiting to be deployed where they could light homes, schools, clinics, towns facing outages. It was as if the pulse of innovation had turned into a drumbeat, and she could march with it. With this knowledge, Maggie updated her presentations. Instead of vague metaphors about energy storage, she now taught with clarity and urgency. Deployments had climbed from 6 GWh to 31 GWh in a single year, revenue had jumped, factories capable of megawatt-scale storage were alive and scaling. She wove in Musk's image, not as hero, but as a mirror. A woman in her late 60s could stand toe-to-toe with global energy transformation if she chose to learn, and act. At one community fair, she brought charts showing Tesla's explosive growth, diagrams of megapacks, and photos of sprawling battery factories in Lathrop and Shanghai. She explained that the Shanghai plant expected to produce around 10,000 megapacks per year, each big enough to power thousands of homes for an hour. Then she asked, what if those megawatt-hours weren't just numbers, but lifelines for our neighbors during storms or blackouts? They listened. A retired nurse mentioned how her rural clinic had once lost power during a heat wave. A farmer asked how these technologies could protect crops and livestock. A high school teacher wondered if she could integrate this real-world story into her science class. Maggie's voice warmed with conviction. She had moved from dreaming to directing, bridging global innovation to local resilience. As summer arrived, Maggie decided to visit a Tesla energy site under construction. The new Megapack factory planned for Brookshire, Texas, near Houston, set to create 1,500 jobs by its third year. She imagined walking the floor where steel met battery cells, where real transformation took shape. It was a pilgrimage, a testament that even starved-for-purpose seniors like herself had a place in the throes of the future. On the drive there, she thought of Musk recounting the rocket failures he watched before founding SpaceX, told that there was only a 10 to 20% chance of success, yet he pressed on, driven by vision and persistence. If a man betting on Mars could face such odds, Maggie thought, then embracing a second act powered by clean energy was not audacious, it was necessary. She arrived at the Brookshire site, a flurry of construction, steel beams rising like silent columns of possibility. Workers in hard hats nodded as she toured, and engineers explained the facility's potential scale. Maggie spoke of her hometown, where a handful of megawalls and powerwalls could mean warmth during outages, lights for medical devices, dignity without fear. They listened with respect. Data and empathy together carried weight. Back home, invigorated, Maggie saw her mission with fresh clarity. She would create a vision and numbers workshop, grounded in hard data and human stories. She would invite county officials, neighbors, school teachers, and seniors to see clean energy not as technical jargon but as living potential. She worked for weeks, designing slide decks with charts of deployments, images of megapacks, Musk's words about refusing to let odds dictate destiny. When the workshop day came, the room was packed. She began, "This is not about being young or tech-savvy. It's about daring to believe. 2 years ago, I thought I was done. Today, I'm standing here because clean energy is growing, with power, with profit, with purpose." She showed the leap from 14.7 to 31.4 GWh, the growth in revenue, the factory plans, then paused, eyeing the faces in the room. "That growth charts a new era. And I believe we belong in it." The applause was full, warm and genuine. She watched people lean forward, not out of obligation but curiosity and hope. A mayor approached afterward. "I want this in our county plan. I want you help me shape it." A teacher hugged her. "You've given me a project for my class." Even skeptics asked questions. Instead of dismissing the data, they leaned in, eager to understand. That night, Maggie sat on her porch, watching stars emerge. She thought of the lattice of possibility, factories, batteries, policies, but most of all, of people awakening to what was within their grasp. Aging wasn't an eraser, she realized. It was a lens. Sharpening clarity, deepening empathy, strengthening resolve. She whispered to the night, "I was never too old to matter. I was just waiting to understand how big the world could still be, and to invite others in." And as the first stars twinkled, she knew she'd found her legacy, not as someone who watched the future impassively, but as someone who helped build it, bolt by bolt, kilowatt by kilowatt, story by story. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? After bathing in the glow of her vision and numbers workshop success, Maggie felt a new momentum pulsing through her life, stronger, steadier, and more urgent than before. She understood that clean energy wasn't a distant dream or abstract concept, it was unfolding right now, and her role in that story was growing bolder. The truth was simple yet electrifying: Tesla's energy division wasn't just a sidebar, it was surging, real, and affirming the power of audacity. She'd recently read that Tesla's energy generation and storage segment had reached nearly $2.4 billion in revenue in the third quarter of 2024, a 52% leap over the same period the previous year. That kind of growth wasn't subtle, it was explosive, and Musk himself called it a gigantic opportunity. Maggie felt each number in her bones, not as a statistic, but as a signal. Change was happening, and she was part of it. As she prepared for her next community gathering, she included these numbers in her hand-drawn charts, alongside a note: "This growth proves that clean energy is not just hopeful, it's profitable." In her voice readings, she reminded her listeners that this wasn't about making a quick buck, it was about the sustainability that would protect their children and grandchildren. She invited them to imagine not just turbines or solar panels, but security, independence, and community resilience powered by clean energy systems they could trust. Maggie also learned that Tesla's Lathrop, California factory had reached a production milestone, manufacturing about 200 megapack units each week, and that a new megapack plant in Shanghai was slated to begin mass production in early 2025. The factories weren't just churning out metal and lithium, they were forging futures. Maggie pictured these massive batteries mingling with her work: community microgrids, storm backup systems, lifelines during outages. It felt less like technology and more like connection. She shared the details with her local energy committee, offering to help design a proposal for neighborhood resilience programs. She suggested pairing local volunteers with Tesla-trained installers so older adults could get Powerwalls or small battery systems in planned, affordable phases. Her plan centered not just on installation, but on education, ensuring that households understood how to manage energy in ways that saved money and lowered emissions. During one meeting, Maggie talked about how 1 megapack holds more than 3.9 megawatt-hours of energy, enough to power 3,600 homes for an hour. She told simple, powerful stories: that's not just kilowatt-hours, it's light in the dark, heat in the cold, security in the storm. The room nodded. Some wiped tears. She realized she had become a translator between big, booming innovation and neighborly hope. That afternoon, she decided to reach out to a teacher at the local high school. Would the students help make placards showing how megapack production ramps up possible? They agreed instantly: bold, colorful visuals that could go up at the energy fair next month. Maggie thought about how inviting young people into this work created a bridge, a conversation that said, "Your future and mine are connected." But growth came with challenges too. During a casual visit to the local utility office, Maggie learned the energy storage market now accounted for nearly 10% of Tesla's total revenue. Something that analysts predict could rise to 14% as investors begin to value it even more strongly. The message was clear: energy storage was stepping out from under Tesla's automotive shadow, and so, too, was Maggie stepping out from the edge of invisibility. Still, not everyone responded with unbridled enthusiasm. At a civic planning meeting, one official questioned the feasibility of relying on a private company's tech for public infrastructure. Maggie listened calmly. She replied, "You're right to ask, but look at the trajectory. This isn't speculation. It's already happening in other towns, cities, states." She referenced the Lathrop milestone and the Shanghai plant to show that scale and replication were real. Her tone was neither combative nor defensive, just clear. The room's skepticism softened. Buoyed by the shift, Maggie decided to create a simple guide for residents interested in small-scale battery storage, covering costs, benefits, safety, and resources. She spent nights drafting, revising, and translating technical terms into everyday language. Kilowatt hours became hours of safe light, backup circuits became power with peace of mind. The guide felt like handing someone a gentle invitation to matter again. As summer began, she hosted an open house in her yard. Neighbors came, curious retirees, young families, teachers, skeptics. She stood amid charts, placards, and stories, each person able to walk away with something tangible, a fact, a visual, or a glimmer of possibility. When a young mother showed Maggie a pink phone charger saying, "Powered by Powerwall," Maggie realized that clean energy was already becoming part of people's daily lives, and she had helped nudge that moment. That night, she sat on her porch swing, the summer air warm and quiet. She thought of how her journey had begun with a flicker sparked by Elon Musk's words, and had grown into a movement rooted in facts and human connection. Aging hadn't been a barrier, it had been a lens, deepening what she saw and what she could build. She whispered to the dark, vision wasn't just about seeing, it was about inviting. I'm not just alive, I'm alive with purpose. And as the stars shimmered overhead, she knew the future she helped imagine wasn't just hers, it was ours, powered by energy, courage, and shared stories. As summer's heat softened into early fall, Maggie felt the steady pulse of progress coursing through her life. Her small town had begun to stir, to glimpse the possibility that clean energy, powered by Tesla's rapidly expanding battery storage, might be more than eco-speak but a concrete force reshaping resilience, dignity, and community. Her role had grown from that shy woman pushing pedals on an old bicycle to a trusted voice helping others power their lives. She found herself facing new challenges, one being the need to manage expectations during the pilot mini-grid rollout. The systems worked, but not perfectly. A rain-drenched week delayed solar charging, a power surge unsettled a sensor, a local headline questioned whether retreats of renewables were viable in small towns. Maggie wrestled with frustration. This wasn't the guarded certainty of textbooks or news clips, it was real life, warts and all. She walked to her garage, where her bicycle leaned beside tools and sketches of battery systems. She closed her eyes and let Musk's words drift in her mind, if you're trying something truly revolutionary, you're going to fail many times. But every failure is a lesson. She wondered, was she prioritizing perception over progress? Did people expect perfection? She decided to shift the conversation. Transparency, not perfection, would build trust. That evening, she wrote a blog post called "The Mini-Grid That Learned to Walk," describing the ups and downs of the pilot project with open honesty. She recounted how weather patterns thwarted solar gains, how sensors misread voltage spikes, how community volunteers adapted and learned. She framed each challenge not as evidence of failure but as proof that learning was happening, resilience growing. The post struck a chord. Messages poured in, from other towns starting their own trials, from readers moved by Maggie's willingness to share the messy reel, and from those reassured that challenges weren't deal-breakers. Buoyed, Maggie decided to host a debrief in the community hall. She invited everyone connected to the pilot, the homeowners, volunteers, skeptics, journalists. She began with the simple truth: this wasn't perfect. And that's okay. Real change often stumbles before it dances. Then she walked them through data on power uptime, changes to sensor calibration, lessons for next rounds, and improvements already planned. She urged attendees not to measure success by smoothness but by persistence. Eyes softened. Conversations followed. Grant writers asked how they could help, students asked how to build sensors. One old neighbor marveled, "We're not just powering lights, we're powering hope." Maggie learned then that inspiring belief wasn't just about delivering results, it was about owning the process, warts, wonder, and all. That spirit carried into a meeting with the County Energy Board. They had asked Maggie to speak about integrating battery-backed shelters into emergency plans. She presented not polished slides but raw insight. Even with hiccups, energy storage increased local grid reliability by over 60% during peak outages last month, and neighbors donated backup flashlights and lifelines. Maggie's honesty cut through red tape. The board agreed to fund an expansion of her mini-grid concept into older residents' homes, with enhanced training and maintenance. Her children joined on a project that weekend, replacing sensor wiring at one of the solar arrays. Michael followed her mixed sketches and notes, an instructional dance born of lived experience. Sarah told Maggie how she had shared the story with friends online, and strangers had written to say they found courage in Grandma's journey. Maggie looked at them, feeling anchored in love and legacy. Meanwhile, media outlets began picking up on the community's progress, not as a tidy triumph, but a living, evolving work of heart and grit. A regional podcast invited her to speak about her messy miracles. She agreed, because perfection doesn't propel change, authenticity does. On air, she spoke of the tension between control and curiosity, between expectations and learning. She spoke of clean energy being less about future gadgets and more about collective resilience, about being able to warm your house, run your fridge, and charge your soul even when storms strike. When the interview aired, responses streamed in, not from environmental zealots but from people burned by outages, isolated by age, abandoned by progress. One listener wrote, "Your mini-grid story was the medicine I needed." Maggie pressed her hand to her chest, steady and real. A few days later, Maggie biked through her neighborhood, early morning sunlight on her back. Her bike and her heart carried momentum. Homes glowed from power walls offering backup. Posters touted workshops coming soon. Children drew battery diagrams in chalk on sidewalks. Neighbors greeted her with letters and questions. It wasn't perfect, not then, not ever. But it was possible, living, human, defiant. She understood now that the true climactic journey wasn't a silver moment of flawless reveal, it was the daily commitment, the small persistent acts grounded in humility and vision. That was the one thing she'd changed, and it was what changed her. That night, Maggie sat in her favorite chair, faded arm cover rustling under her hand. She thought of her life before, quiet routines, fading hope, silent grief. And she thought of now, bikes and batteries, community and courage, data and stories converging into something electrified with purpose. She whispered softly into the dark. I became sturdy by being honest. I grew by showing my cracks. The hush answered, and you helped others grow too. She smiled. The path forward glowed not as a straight line but as a flickering, faithful journey, one young and old could walk together, step by honest step. Maggie felt planted in her purpose, roots of courage sinking deeper into her community and her soul. The transformation that began with a flicker had grown into a fire, and now it was time to fan the flames of what she had learned and built. Her town wasn't just talking about clean energy, it was living it, breathing it, and slowly becoming resilient. She stood in her garden one morning, cup of coffee cooling in her hands, reflecting on how far the journey had come. Tesla's energy storage business had exploded, deploying 31.4 GWh of battery storage in 2024, more than double the volume of 2023, and the energy division had raked in over $10 billion in revenue that year, a 67% leap. Even better, the profit margin had expanded dramatically, with gross profit reaching $2.6 billion. In Q2 2025 alone, energy deployments were up 48% compared to the first half of 2024, on track to surpass 100 GWh in total deployed capacity. This wasn't just business, it was humanity's quiet revolution. Maggie's heart swelled knowing that the movement she helped spark in her tiny town mirrored the momentum sweeping the globe. It wasn't fantasy, it was real, growing, unstoppable. That morning, she organized a Resilience Through Storage gathering at the community center. The room filled quickly, retirees seeking security, parents anxious about outages, tech-curious students, skeptical officials, all drawn by the pulse of hope. She began with Tesla's energy surge, translating numbers into life-saving stories. A 31.4 GWh deployment wasn't abstract, it could power hundreds of clinics, schools, homes when storms strike. A $2.6 billion gross profit meant reinvestment, reducing costs, enabling more accessible batteries for ordinary people. She then introduced local microgrid expansions, new Powerwall clusters in the senior center, a solar battery system at the food pantry, battery-backed emergency lighting in the school. She invited volunteers to help manage them, turning infrastructure into community care. By the end, the room buzzed, not with jargon, but with purpose. That week, Maggie worked with a small team, including a high school science teacher, to draft a grant proposal for funding a replicated mini-grid model for neighbor towns. They framed it as energy justice, linking resilience, equity, and inclusion. They cited Tesla's leadership in energy deployment and profit growth to underscore feasibility. Meanwhile, Tesla's energy division continued to dominate the market, remaining the top global integrator of battery energy storage systems in 2024, holding 39% of the North American market. But competition was heating up, especially from Chinese firms in Europe and the Middle East. Maggie knew that staying informed, adaptive, and inclusive was essential, not just build, but evolve with resilience. A local council member invited Maggie to speak at a regional energy summit. She accepted, planning to stand not just as a speaker, but as a living bridge, from boardroom metrics to backyard households. That evening, she prepared with her curiosity sharp and humility soft. On the day of the summit, she stepped onto the stage and began. "I'm not an engineer. I'm not a scientist. I'm someone who learned that age doesn't limit impact, it deepens it. And that even giants like Tesla, deploying 31.4 GWh and generating billions, started with a vision that people like you and me could understand and trust." She shared the story of her town's mini-grid, the school, the senior center, the smiles it brought. She concluded, when energy storage becomes about community, and not just capacity, we all power forward together. The response was thunderous. A policymaker approached, offering a small state grant, an engineer offered to volunteer for pilot installations, an academic asked if she'd co-author a case study. She left glowing, not from praise, but from the electricity of collective movement. Back home, Maggie gathered her journal and memories in the garage, surrounded by bicycle parts and battery diagrams. She realized that her story, her transformed life, was woven into the larger fabric of what Tesla's growth symbolized, that the future belonged to those who dared to bridge big data with everyday life. She'd begun by repairing a bicycle to reclaim freedom. Now she was helping towns claim power they'd once believed belonged elsewhere. She walked to the kitchen window and looked at the quiet streets, imagining homes softly powered, families sleeping in the hum of possibility. She whispered, "I was never too old to lead. I was just waiting to see how wide the world could stretch. And to pull us all forward." Maggie woke before dawn, the world still quiet, the soft hum of early morning reminding her that life moves even when we hold our breath. She rose, drew a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped onto the porch. In the pale light, she reflected on the journey that had begun with a spark, and now blazed with purpose. Tesla's energy arm had transformed before her eyes. In 2024, Tesla deployed a monumental 31.4 GWh of energy storage, more than twice the 14.7 GWh of the year before, a leap that signaled urgency, potential, and accelerating momentum. She thought of each kilowatt-hour as a whisper of progress, a promise delivered in steel and chemistry. More than raw numbers, the story was of resurgence and relevance, revenue of over $10 billion, a 67% uptick spurred by energy generation and storage, Tesla's most profitable division, finally outpacing automotive margins. Gross profit from the energy segment soared to $2.6 billion in 2024, climbing from just $300 million a few years prior. In 2025, that growth pressed onward. Tesla's energy storage deployment in Q2 alone was 9.6 GWh, bringing the year-to-date total to 20 GWh, a 48% jump over the same period last year. The energy division made up 23% of Tesla's total profit while contributing only 12% of total revenue, a testament to its efficiency and promise. Maggie's Village had mirrored this rise, not in gigawatt hours, but in community power. Their pilot worked, imperfectly, honestly. Solar panels glowed confidently on the rooftops, power walls humbly stood guard, mini-grids flickered to life like small constellations of possibility. She saw how global data had translated into personal resilience. That morning, she prepared for her most ambitious presentation yet, a Resilience in Numbers workshop blending Tesla facts with human hope. She charted deployment increases, revenue surges, and profit margins. But she also wove in stories, the neighbor's home lit after storms, students learning energy science firsthand, elders sleeping with less fear. She taught that resilience was as much about connection as capacity. At noon, the community center pulsed softly with gathered energy, elders leaning on canes but beaming, parents with notebooks, officials curious, youth scribbling diagrams. Maggie began by saying, "Numbers tell a story, but people give it heart." She highlighted Tesla's global surge and invited listeners to see their own power mirrored there. Then her phone buzzed. A note from Tesla Energy Ventures. Tesla had applied for a UK license to supply electricity to households under the brand Tesla Electric, an audacious expansion into continental power delivery. Maggie pictured the roofs of Britain glowing with power walls, residential batteries joining in a shared grid. A child piped up, "Can we do that here too?" Maggie thought of the regulatory constraints and infrastructure. But why not? Why not begin locally, even with something like a neighborhood virtual power plant, like in California, where Tesla connected 100,000 residential batteries to deliver grid demand relief? A volunteer asked about global projects. Did Tesla really power Hawaii's island with megapacks? Maggie nodded. The megapack was deployed to replace coal on Oahu, to stabilize AI centers, to carry superclusters. With that lens, she said, every Powerwall and mini-grid they built felt like part of a global heartbeat. Her words echoed, courage wasn't local or grand, it was layered in care, knowledge, and action. That afternoon, she met with town leaders. She pitched a neighborhood virtual microgrid concept. Homes and a school connected via stored solar power, sharing data and resilience. It wasn't futuristic, it was already happening somewhere, in piecemeal, scrubbed for cost and clarity. She offered herself to guide the planning. That night, Maggie sat in her yard, stars emerging, electrons flowing unseen. She remembered the old bicycle in the garage, the blog she began hesitantly, the fear of being too old. Each step led here, to guiding change writ small and alive. She spoke into the dark, age didn't diminish, age distilled. I've learned that purpose isn't found. It's chosen, powered, shared. The quiet answered, keep going. And she would, because the future wasn't just rising, it was spreading, and she would help light every corner she could reach. Maggie awoke to a violet dawn, the air crisp and filled with promise, or maybe that promise was inside her all along, finally stretching wide enough to breathe freely. Her home, quiet except for the hum of possibility, felt connected, linked by low hums of power walls, the faint glow of solar panels, and the memory of every step that brought her here. Tesla's energy business was writing a new chapter right before her eyes. Q1 2025 saw energy generation and storage revenue soar 67% to a staggering $2.73 billion, while energy storage deployments climbed an astonishing 154% to 10.4 GWh. It felt like watching a rocket, soaring upward out of Earth's shadow. Maggie absorbed the numbers, not as data, but as whispers of shared possibility, that just as Tesla could transform industries, her small efforts could transform lives. Her mind raced with implications. Massive factories were humming, power walls were going into homes, not just for walls, but for walks of dignity and independence. The scale felt big and grounded all at once. So she drafted a new call: when global momentum meets local action, the future unfolds. That afternoon, she organized a From Gigawatt to Neighborhood session in the community hall. She anchored her presentation in the numbers: Tesla's growth, community microgrids, the rise of virtual power plants, and wove it into personal stories: an elderly couple kept safe during a blackout, a mom with working lights and fridge after a storm, a teenager understanding physics through real battery systems. She explained virtual power plants, harnessing home batteries to support the grid. In places from North Carolina to California, Powerwall owners earned hundreds annually by sharing stored energy during peak events, often while maintaining necessary backup reserves. She described how California was testing 100,000 residential batteries with a combined 535 megawatts of power, like a small city humming quietly in the background. Many faces in the room brightened, thinking, this could be us too. As she spoke, she noticed once skeptical neighbors leaning closer, women in rocking chairs nodding, and kids leaning forward on the edge of their seats. She realized her words weren't just information, they were invitations to belong. The following morning, Maggie opened the newspaper to find headlines that chilled and stirred. Tesla had applied for a license to supply electricity directly to UK homes, signaling a bold leap into household energy markets beyond the US. Some officials urged caution, citing security concerns, but Maggie saw frontiers of possibility, energy sovereignty, and global ripples connecting to local resilience. She thought, what seemed like distant maneuvers in foreign markets were arcs shaping the future. The reach of energy freedom, once abstract, now had outlines, and she had a pencil. Inspired, Maggie invited high school science students to reimagine the local microgrid as a neighborhood virtual power plant. They brainstormed data dashboards, community sharing apps, and educational plans. She worked with tech-savvy volunteers to draft proposals aligning with Tesla's connected solutions and VPP models, programs already paying households like Duke Energy's Power Pair program in North Carolina $600 annually for Powerwall participation. Maggie offered to pilot a neighbor-to-neighbor VPP, where homes could network their power walls to support each other in emergencies and even earn credits in the process. She traveled to the senior center, where a local official questioned, "Won't this tech be too technical for our team?" Maggie answered gently, "Not if we teach it lovingly, step by step." She scheduled a demo, showing how easily one local power wall enrolled, dispatched during a test grid event, and earned monthly credits, while preserving a 20% backup reserve. The room hushed and then rallied, curiosity blossoming where doubt had taken root. Behind her, Maggie watched the world shift with every Powerwall app alert, every kilowatt dispatched, every solar ray captured on dusty rooftops. Energy wasn't just flowing, it was converging: technological courage, human courage, collective courage. Her children, drawn again into the arc of her life, asked how they could help. Sarah offered to spread the story digitally, Michael offered to help draft utility grant applications. The distance that had grown between them gently shrank as they worked together, dreams rewoven with shared purpose. That evening, Maggie sat beneath the emerging night sky, electricity humming softly in her home, and thought, she had not done this alone. The surge of Tesla's energy business gave her data. The spirit of Elon Musk gave her metaphor. But the heart of her journey lay in connection, between neighbors, across ages, through storms and technical blueprints. It was power shared, hope renewed, purpose chosen. She whispered into the dark, age did not cage me. It cleared me, so I could see how far we could all go together. And the quiet night answered, and together, you will carry the future. Maggie awoke, not to birdsong, but to the soft pulsing of her power wall backing up her home, an unseen hum of resilience that had become normal, but never boring. She wrapped herself in a blanket and stepped outside. The dawn light scattered pink across the horizon, and she thought of how far she'd come, and how far her town still could. Tesla's energy story felt like a symphony in full crescendo. In Q2 2025, Tesla deployed 9.6 GWh of battery storage, its third highest quarterly total ever, bringing its year-to-date total to 20 GWh, a 48% jump over the first half of 2024. In 2024, total energy deployment hit a record 31.4 GWh, more than doubling from 14.7 GWh the prior year. Meanwhile, Tesla's energy division became its most profitable, contributing 23% of total profit while accounting for only 12% of revenue. Factories in Shanghai and Nevada continued ramping up. Tesla was on track to surpass 100 GWh of storage deployed in the coming quarters. These weren't just figures. They were proof that storage was surging, not as sideline, but as the backbone of a climate-aware future. For Maggie, each gigawatt-hour was a reminder of what power, real power, looked like, and how her humble efforts amplified that story in her own backyard. Today's gathering would be different. She called it, Community Power Future. A public forum to imagine their town's collective version of what Tesla's surge meant here. She prepared her materials, charts of deployments, factory maps, and the story of local microgrids alive with energy and empathy. By midday the hall was filled, neighbors leaning into ambition, elderly friends curious and open, school kids sketching battery diagrams, and a city official showing hope where he once showed hesitation. Maggie began simply, Tesla is deploying more energy storage than ever. But here's the new story, we're not spectators. We're participants. She showed them that in Q2 alone, Tesla deployed 9.6 GWh, almost enough to power over 3,000 homes for a whole night. She talked of how their local minigrid brought power back when the lights went out, and how Powerwalls reassured sleeping grandchildren. Each number found its counterpart in a smile, a nod, a shared memory. One teacher stood to ask, can our students help track solar production in real time? Another neighbor asked about funding microgrid expansion for the assisted living center. Maggie answered with eagerness, knowing that connection between tech innovation and real lives was her true skill. During the session, a reporter interviewed Maggie, asking how a senior in a quiet town became a beacon for energy resilience. She paused, searching for words. Because courage isn't just about blazing ahead, it's about showing up, even when it's hard, with hope as your guiding light. The reporter smiled, capturing sincerity more than soundbite. As the afternoon light shifted, an engineer from a nearby utility approached. She spoke of Tesla now holding 39% of North America's battery storage market, and how their systems, and the mindset behind them, aligned with local infrastructural dreams. Maggie saw that global leadership could be kindred to community ambition, bold, technical, and, most importantly, accessible. After the forum, a soft buzz filled the hall, no wild applause, but the kind of energy that lingers. Plans were sketched, a neighborhood VPP trial so homes could share energy during high-demand periods. 3 families volunteered to test virtual grid participation. A grant writer offered to help Maggie draft funding support. Her heart echoed, the future wasn't oncoming. It was being built here. That evening, Maggie walked home under violet sky, humming with a soft power. Inside, lights glowed gently. The hum of systems working. Her path had been from loneliness to leading, from isolation to inclusive vision. Each step mirrored Tesla's journey, ramping up capacity, proving technology, shifting imaginations. She thought of Elon Musk's example, not as idol but as echo, of dreaming big, of persevering, of blending daring with dignity. And she thought of herself, not forgotten, not fading, but found. Found in purpose. Found in community. Age wasn't an anchor, it was an amplifier. She whispered into the hush. The home held her words, returning them in warmth and quiet certainty. The future was not just bright. It was shared, and powered by every story that dared to believe. The sun had barely risen when Maggie stepped onto her porch, the crisp morning air filling her lungs with a fresh sense of purpose. She glanced at the power wall mounted beside her garage, a silent sentinel, quietly storing energy harvested from the solar panels above. This little box had become a symbol of more than just electricity. It was a beacon of hope, a testament to what could be accomplished when courage met innovation. She thought about the journey she'd been on, how just months ago, she felt invisible, trapped by the weight of time and doubt, and now, here she was, standing at the edge of a new frontier, ready to help her community step into a cleaner, brighter future. Tesla's latest announcements fueled that excitement. The company's battery storage deployments had surged past 12 GWh in Q3 2025, smashing previous records and pushing closer to that ambitious 100 GWh annual target. The Gigafactory in Nevada was humming with energy, churning out battery cells that powered everything from sleek electric cars to massive grid storage installations. The energy division had become Tesla's fastest-growing business segment, with revenue growing nearly 80% year-over-year. More than just numbers, this represented a tectonic shift. The transition to renewable energy was no longer a dream but an unstoppable movement. Sources: EnergyStorage.news, Tesla.com. Maggie felt that surge as a current coursing through her veins. It wasn't just about tech, it was about lives transformed, communities strengthened, futures reclaimed. Inspired by Tesla's advances and driven by the spark Elon Musk had ignited in her, Maggie began organizing a new project, a neighborhood energy cooperative designed to harness the power of shared batteries and solar panels. The idea was simple but radical: neighbors pooling their energy resources to create a resilient, self-sustaining microgrid that could operate independently during blackouts and reduce overall costs by selling excess energy back to the utility. This wasn't theoretical. Tesla's virtual power plant programs in states like California and North Carolina had already proven the model's success, where families earned hundreds of dollars annually by participating in energy-sharing networks. Maggie's town could do this too. The first step was education. She hosted workshops at the community center, bringing in Tesla energy experts who explained how power walls could be linked to form a virtual grid. She shared stories from other towns where similar efforts had kept lights on during wildfires and storms, where elderly residents no longer feared power outages because their homes could sustain themselves. Each session was packed, attendees ranging from curious retirees to skeptical city officials to bright-eyed teens eager to learn how batteries, solar, and software were reshaping the energy landscape. Maggie's children, Sarah and Michael, now fully invested in her mission, helped spread the word through social media and local newsletters. Michael coordinated with tech-savvy volunteers to set up an online platform where neighbors could monitor real-time energy usage and contributions. Sarah worked with the local school district to integrate energy literacy into the curriculum, inspiring a new generation to think about power not just as something to consume, but as a resource to steward collectively. With every meeting, Maggie felt her own confidence grow. The fears that once haunted her, the creeping sense of irrelevance, the quiet isolation, were fading beneath the floodlights of community connection. She realized Elon Musk's influence was less about his fame or fortune and more about his mindset, relentless curiosity, the refusal to accept limits, the courage to start something new no matter your age or background. If Elon could build rockets and revolutionize transportation, why couldn't she help build a cleaner energy future for her neighbors? The day the first cooperative microgrid went live was one of those rare moments when time seemed to hold its breath. Maggie stood outside the community center, watching as technicians flipped the switch connecting a dozen homes' power walls and solar arrays into a seamless energy-sharing network. The app lit up, showing a balance of stored energy, power flow, and credits earned by participants. Neighbors gathered, some teary-eyed, others smiling broadly, united by a sense that they were no longer powerless, no longer alone. That evening, as Maggie sat in her living room bathed in the warm glow of sustainable energy, she reflected on how far she had come. The journey wasn't just about technology or community projects, it was about reclaiming agency in a world that often dismisses the elderly as irrelevant. Tesla's energy revolution was proof that change was possible at any stage of life. The question was no longer, is it too late, but what can we build next? Her phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. Mom, the local news wants to feature your story. They say you're inspiring a movement. Maggie smiled, feeling the unmistakable warmth of purpose rekindled. She typed back, tell them this is just the beginning. As night deepened, she looked out her window at the stars, feeling connected not only to her community but to a global effort to power a better world. Elon Musk's example had shown her that age was not a cage but a call to rise. And with each battery charged, each light powered, Maggie was proof that courage and innovation could spark transformation in even the quietest corners. The future was bright, and she was ready to help lead the way. The morning sun filtered gently through the curtains as Maggie sat at her kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee warming her hands. Outside, the neighborhood was already stirring, neighbors tending gardens, children laughing on their way to school, and the soft hum of life quietly renewed. Maggie felt a steady pulse within herself, a rhythm that echoed the transformation sweeping through her community and her own soul. Just a year ago, she had been uncertain, weighed down by years of regret and isolation. Now, she was a catalyst for change, her story entwined with Tesla's revolutionary energy mission. Tesla's latest strides confirmed what Maggie had long sensed: the clean energy future was accelerating at a breathtaking pace. The company announced the near completion of its new cell factory in Nevada, a critical step toward producing 100 GWh of battery storage annually, enough power to energize entire cities and stabilize fragile grids. In 2025 alone, Tesla had deployed over 30 GWh of energy storage worldwide, nearly tripling the figure from just 2 years prior. This wasn't incremental progress, it was a seismic shift reshaping how power was generated, stored, and shared. Sources: EnergyStorage.news, Tesla.com. Maggie's heart swelled with pride and possibility. She was part of this unfolding story. She turned her attention to the latest project, expanding the cooperative microgrid to include local businesses and the town's community center. The goal was ambitious but vital. By integrating larger commercial power packs with home power walls, they could create a resilient network capable of withstanding severe weather events, something Maggie's town had suffered through too often. The cooperative would reduce energy costs, cut carbon emissions, and foster a new kind of community resilience. Her mornings filled with calls and emails as she coordinated with utility representatives, Tesla engineers, and local leaders. Some were skeptical, clinging to old ways, wary of change. Maggie met their doubts not with frustration but with empathy, sharing stories of how other communities had transformed their energy futures through cooperation and technology. "It's not about replacing what we know," she said gently. "It's about building something stronger, together." Her children continued to be her strongest allies. Sarah, now managing social outreach, arranged interviews and crafted stories highlighting local success. Michael handled technical logistics, ensuring seamless integration of new systems and troubleshooting challenges. Their combined efforts knit the community tighter, bridging generations and opening hearts to new possibilities. One afternoon, Maggie received a call from a neighbor, Tom, a retired electrician with a wary smile and decades of experience. "I've been watching all this battery talk with a mix of hope and caution," he said. "But after that last blackout, I want in. Can you show me how to hook up a power wall?" Maggie smiled, her heart lifting. "Absolutely, Tom. Let's get you started." Together, they planned a weekend installation workshop, bringing practical skills to neighbors eager to reclaim control over their energy needs. The workshop became a turning point. Tom's expertise and Maggie's vision combined to create a hands-on learning environment. Neighbors helped each other wire solar inverters, set up Powerwall apps, and monitor energy flows in real time. Children learned alongside adults, their questions sparking lively discussions about electrons, grids, and the planet's future. The cooperative wasn't just about power, it was about empowerment. Tesla's virtual power plant program was central to their success. By linking their batteries, the town could sell stored energy back to the grid during peak demand, earning revenue and easing strain on the electrical system. It was a win-win, turning individual investments into shared prosperity. Maggie tracked progress through Tesla's user-friendly dashboards, celebrating each kilowatt-hour contributed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maggie stood outside with Tom and several neighbors, watching the town's Powerwall system synchronize. The glow from their homes was steady and bright, an emblem of resilience. This, Maggie said, is what happens when we refuse to be left behind. She thought about Elon Musk's relentless drive, not as a distant celebrity but as a symbol of fearless innovation and radical hope. His example had taught her that limitations were often illusions, that reinvention was always possible, no matter your age or circumstances. That night, Maggie journaled, "I am not just a witness to change, I am a maker of it." The spark of a single idea can light countless lives. Her story began to attract attention beyond her town. A regional energy conference invited her to speak about community microgrids and the role of seniors in driving clean energy adoption. She hesitated, public speaking was never easy, but remembered Elon's mantra. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. She accepted, preparing to share not just technology but the human heart behind it. On stage, Maggie spoke with quiet passion. She told the audience about the fear and isolation that once shadowed her life and how Tesla's innovations and community cooperation transformed that darkness into light. She urged everyone to look beyond age and limitations to the power of collective action and courage. Her words resonated. After the speech, young entrepreneurs and seasoned engineers alike approached, eager to collaborate and learn. Maggie realized that her voice was becoming a bridge, connecting innovation with lived experience, technology with empathy. Back home, the cooperative continued to thrive. More families joined, and local businesses installed power packs to secure their operations during outages. The community center became a hub for energy education and social gatherings, a place where hope and power flowed freely. One afternoon, Maggie received a call from her daughter Sarah. "Mom, I've been talking to Tesla's outreach team. They want to feature our cooperative in their next newsletter. They're calling it a model for other towns." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. The journey from isolation to influence was complete. As she reflected on the past year, Maggie knew this was only the beginning. The future held challenges, technical hurdles, policy debates, and moments of doubt. But armed with knowledge, community, and the fearless spirit inspired by Elon Musk, she felt ready to meet them. Her last journal entry of the day read, "We are not too old to dream, to build, to lead." Every battery charged is a testament to resilience, every shared what a promise of hope. And with that, Maggie looked out at the twinkling lights of her town, powered by clean energy and boundless possibility. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming lilacs as Maggie walked down the quiet street, her steps measured but steady. She paused to watch a group of children playing beneath solar-powered street lamps, their laughter ringing clear and bright. This scene was once unimaginable in a town where power outages had been a constant shadow. Now, thanks to the microgrid they built, life pulsed forward undimmed by fear or uncertainty. Maggie smiled, the weight of years lifting with each new dawn. Tesla's clean energy momentum was unstoppable. The company had just announced a breakthrough in battery technology, a new silicon-dominant anode that promised to boost energy density by 20% while reducing costs and improving longevity. This leap was more than incremental. It was a revolution that could accelerate the shift to renewables by making storage more affordable and efficient than ever before. The factory in Nevada, now fully operational, was ramping production to meet global demand, with plans to expand further into international markets. Sources: Tesla.com, EnergyStorage.news. For Maggie, these announcements were fuel for the fire she had kindled within her community. The microgrid cooperative was growing steadily, its members now numbering over 100 households and several local businesses. Together, they were weaving a safety net of clean energy resilience, sharing power in ways that once belonged only to utilities. It was a tangible demonstration that the future was collaborative, sustainable, and inclusive. One challenge still loomed large: educating the broader community, especially older residents who often felt overwhelmed by the rapid pace of technological change. Maggie knew that bridging this gap required more than facts and figures; it demanded empathy, patience, and storytelling. She began organizing a series of energy story nights, where neighbors shared their personal experiences with power outages, renewable energy, and the cooperative's impact on their lives. At one gathering, Harold, a retired school principal, spoke softly about the anxiety he felt during the last blackout. "It was dark and silent," he recalled, "but knowing that my home was powered by our community's shared energy made all the difference. It wasn't just about light, it was about connection." His words stirred the room, a reminder that energy was as much about human warmth as electrons flowing through wires. Maggie shared her own story: the loneliness she once felt, the doubts that clouded her mind, and the spark Elon Musk's vision had ignited within her. "We are not powerless," she said, her voice steady. "No matter our age, no matter our past, we can be architects of change. Together, we are lighting the way." The emotional resonance of these nights deepened bonds and inspired new volunteers. One of them was Linda, a retired nurse who had been hesitant about technology but now eagerly helped neighbors install solar panels and power walls. Another was Javier, a high school student fascinated by renewable energy, who developed an app to help track the cooperative's energy savings in real time. Tesla's influence permeated every aspect of the cooperative's evolution, not just through its products but through its philosophy of innovation and resilience. Maggie often reflected on Elon Musk's fearless approach to problems, his willingness to embrace failure as a step toward success. "He taught me that change doesn't come from comfort zones," she would tell anyone who asked. As the cooperative prepared to celebrate its one-year anniversary, Maggie felt a profound sense of accomplishment. What had begun as a tentative idea had blossomed into a movement that was transforming her town's relationship with energy and each other. Local officials now recognized the cooperative as a model for sustainable development, and neighboring towns had reached out to learn from their experience. The anniversary event was held in the community center, decorated with banners celebrating clean energy and unity. Maggie stood before the crowd, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "This is more than a celebration," she said. "It's a testament to what we can achieve when we refuse to be defined by age or circumstance. We are proof that the future belongs to those who dare to dream and act." Her speech was met with applause and tears, the kind that come from shared struggle and triumph. In that moment, Maggie realized that her journey mirrored Tesla's own path, bold, uncertain at times, but always propelled by a vision of a better world. Later that evening, as she walked home under a canopy of stars, Maggie felt the hum of the microgrid beneath her feet, a steady heartbeat of progress. The community was no longer just surviving, it was thriving, powered by clean energy and the unyielding spirit of its people. She paused to gaze up at the night sky, feeling connected not only to her neighbors but to a global movement reshaping the planet. Elon Musk's example had shown her that limitations were challenges to overcome, not barriers to acceptance. And in embracing that mindset, Maggie had rediscovered purpose, resilience, and hope. Her final thoughts as she entered her home were simple and profound: "We are the change we seek." It's never too late to power a new future. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?